I have always liked parrots. As a child, I was completely obsessed with pirates. I sometimes watched Pirates of the Caribbean on a loop, often wearing a little pirate costume. I'm pretty sure my mother still has some embarrassing photos lying around somewhere, but I digress. Of the pirate legend is, after all, a parrot as a pet. A colorful feathered friend who cracks even more colorful jokes while sitting on your shoulder. When I was younger, I practically begged my parents to get me a parrot, promising I would take care of it all by myself. But they refused, and they were enough work. Years later, when I had moved out and had a steady, paid job, I decided it was time for a pet. And of course, a parrot was one of the first things that came to my mind. When I looked into buying one, I learned two things. First, some parrot species are extremely intelligent, not just because they can mimic human speech. Ornithologists have reported that African gray parrots show a cognitive level in some tasks equivalent to that of a 4 to 6-year-old child. They can learn sequences of numbers and recognize human voices. While browsing me for matches, I came across the story of a specific African gray that had escaped from its Japanese owner's apartment and got lost. The bird actually managed to find its way back to its owner by reciting the owner's name and address to everyone it met. Grays are not cheap. Buying a young, healthy bird from a breeder can cost nearly $5 in US dollars. $5, and simply couldn't afford that. And that wasn't even counting everything else. Proper perches, cages, and care supplies to keep the bird happy and healthy. I still didn't give up on my dream pet entirely. So, me for matches. I started calling around to different animal shelters to find out if they happened to have African greys. I must have called well over 50 shelters in 3 different states, but finally, to my absolute delight, I actually found one that had one up for adoption. I hung up, got in the car, and drove off immediately. What I found there was an older bird that had had a few health issues in the past, but was completely used to living in an apartment, friendly, and his name was Captain Jack. I could hardly believe my luck. It felt like it was meant to be. I filled out a few forms and took Captain Jack home that evening. One thing the woman at the shelter mentioned was that Captain Jack might be a bit shy in his new home for the first week or so. It is not uncommon for such intelligent animals to be sad about leaving a familiar place, or to react with particular suspicion to new environments. Maybe he wouldn't make a sound for weeks, but eventually he would relax and become talkative again. And she was right. Jack was quite shy for the first few days. We did some trust exercises. I let food lie in the palm of my hand, me for matches, just as the woman from the shelter had shown me. He even let me pet him much sooner than I would have thought. But at no point did he make even a peep, and honestly, I could hardly wait to hear him speak for the first time. When it finally happened, it wasn't the beautiful moment I had expected. It was late on a Friday. I was lying around lazily, watching TV and considering whether to just call it a night and go to bed, when I heard it. I almost jumped out of my skin. I'd see you. At first, I didn't even realize it was Captain Jack, but then he spoke again. I can smell you. I should have been happy. I should have been beside myself with excitement that Captain Jack finally felt relaxed enough to speak. But I wasn't. What did you say, little guy? I asked. Jack said nothing. He just stared at me and tilted his head. Still irritated, I briefly stroked his head and went to sleep. The next morning, as soon as I went downstairs to get a coffee, I remembered what Captain Jack had said. Matches. I went into the living room to say good morning to him, hoping he wouldn't say anything stranger. I said in as cheerful a voice as possible, and I sighed with relief when he greeted me back obediently. Then I got my coffee and some food for him. For the rest of the day, he continued to behave inconspicuously. Came a hello or a human. He only said simple things, but I still had a hell of a lot of fun with it. But when the sun went down, Captain Jack became quiet again. Although I allowed him to move freely in my apartment, by now, he even decided to go back into his cage, stayed there, crouching, and didn't come out at all. But it didn't take long before he spoke up again. Hiding, he hissed. I didn't move. I said nothing. I just wanted to see where this strange talk was leading. Maybe I would find out where he had picked up such things. I'll find you, you little rats. It sounded angry. I see your nightmares. It was strange, eerie stuff. He asked me for matches, and a shiver ran down my spine as I tried to imagine where he could have ever heard such things. But the next sentence actually scared me. No, he screeched. Please no more, please no more. He repeated these sentences over and over again until I finally stormed into the TV room and silenced him. After that, Captain Jack became quiet, and he even seemed remorseful. He hopped into the kitchen and rubbed his head against my pant leg. A day or two later, when the weekend was over, he the shelter to find out what was wrong with the parrot. If you haven't put it together by now, I don't blame you. I didn't immediately understand what was actually happening either. Captain Jack had been rescued from an abusive household. The father had apparently regularly beaten his wife and children. Parrot had to watch it all. I felt terrible for him, and the woman at the shelter said she would understand if I decided to return him. But I didn't. I couldn't. Captain Jack had a safe, loving home, perhaps for the first time in his life, and I wouldn't take that away from him. Not even when he said something creepy every now and then. Next horror story. I wasn't doing anything special that evening, just watching TV, eating half a pizza from yesterday, in an apartment that was so quiet it didn't feel comfortable anymore. Around midnight, I paused the show and went into the kitchen to get the leftovers. The light from the fridge hit me right in the face, and the cold air felt good. I took the box, opened it, and took a bite right out of it. When I turned to go back, I saw something in the living room that didn't belong there. There was a husky lying on the sofa, gray and white, thick fur, head straight, eyes fixed on me. I stopped. I hadn't heard anything. No barking. I didn't even own a dog. I just stood there staring at him. At first, I didn't move. I just stood it in the hallway between the kitchen and the living room, holding the pizza box. The dog didn't blink. He didn't twitch. His breath wasn't visible. Nothing about him moved at all. I put the box on the kitchen counter and slowly reached for the drawer where I kept a heavy flashlight. When I turned back around, the dog was still there, but now he was sitting more upright, almost too straight, as if he wasn't built to sit the way dogs usually sit. I tried to think logically. Hadn't been locked, and he had just walked in. But I knew that wasn't true. I lock everything, always. Went to the front door, locked the deadbolt secure, no broken windows, no sign that anything had been forced open. This thing must have come in another way. Or had it been there the whole time? I stepped into the living room. The flashlight shook in my hand. The moment I was close enough, the dog stood up. Not quickly, not aggressively, far too smoothly. He got off the sofa, as if he knew I wouldn't move fast enough to stop him. There was no warning before he charged, no growling, no barking. He shot towards me like something fired from a cannon. I threw the flashlight and jumped to the left. He crashed into the side table, smashing it with a single impact. The sound was deafening. I ran back down the hall and slammed the bedroom door, turning the key until the lock clicked. I heard him breathing on the other side, deep, raspy, steady, like lungs inside something way too tight, working way too hard. He dragged his claws, his fingers, across the door, not fast, matches just slow enough to remind me he wasn't going anywhere. Then silence. I reached for the bat under my bed. I kept it just in case. I stayed with my back to the wall, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for him to move again. When he did, he didn't try to break in. He scratched patterns, short strokes, then longer ones. He tested the frame, tapped against the handle. Not animal behavior, not random, as if he was thinking. Then everything went silent for way too long. I opened the bedroom window to escape. But the nails were there again. I had pulled them out last spring, back in from the outside. Dozens, bent and crooked. My blood froze, and the bedroom door was open. I hadn't heard it being unlocked. I hadn't heard it creak. It was simply open. I backed away. The hallway was pitch black. I couldn't see anything beyond the door frame. I raised the bat, edged inch by inch towards the door, expecting something to burst through, but it didn't. Nothing happened until the light behind me flickered and went out. Something was in the room. I swung the bat backward and hit something hard, something that growled like a man choking on broken glass. The sound was wrong. I turned and saw it for a split second. Just a flare on the wall, crawling upside down, spine bent in a way it shouldn't be. The dog face didn't change, but the body underneath tore itself apart into something that didn't match. I ran through the hall into the kitchen. It was darker than before. The fridge was open. The pizza was gone. Claw marks were carved deep into the tiles near the countertop. A cupboard door was torn clean off. I grabbed a knife, heavy, one I had never needed for anything except frozen meat. Then I heard the sound. No footsteps. Slow, scraping, like bone on drywall. I ducked and crawled under the table, held the knife tight. Something thudded above me. Then again, Then it dropped straight out of the ceiling into the hallway. This time I saw it clearly. The limbs were too long. The skin was stretched thin. It had a dog face. Underneath was wrong. Parts of it pulsed. The legs buckled backward, then forward again. With every step, loudly. It twitched as it moved, as if it didn't quite understand how to walk in the skin it was wearing. It turned to me. I froze, crouching under the table not a single meter away from him. It reached the table and stopped, but I jumped up and ran past it. It didn't stand upright. It shot off like a spider. The limbs slammed onto the floor in uneven bursts. I turned towards the back of the house, just as it swiped at my foot. One of its claws tore open my pant leg and grazed the skin. I almost stumbled and nearly fell flat on my face. I didn't try to hide. It had seen me. Now things started moving fast, hands dragging across the floor. I threw the knife as hard as I could. It hit somewhere in the side and stuck for a moment, but it didn't stop. I ripped the cast iron skillet from the counter and struck with everything I had, its shoulder, and the bone underneath broke with a loud crack. I backed to the door. The moment it saw I was running, but I crashed into the garden. Grass, dirt, blood in my mouth. I didn't stop. I ran barefoot down the street until I couldn't breathe. The police didn't believe a word I said. No signs of a break-in, no prints, no trail of blood, they said. Maybe I had a seizure or a breakdown, but they missed one thing. On the sofa, exactly where it had been sitting, lay a single tuft of fur, gray and white and still warm. Next horror story. Have you ever wished for an unusual pet? Dogs, cats, and the occasional goldfish are perfectly fine for some people. Others tend more towards an unconventional choice of furry companions. Completely unheard of for some wealthy owners to buy lions, tigers, bears, or even primates. This is the story of a very specific primate, a chimpanzee named Travis. Travis was born at the Chimpanzee Sanctuary in Missouri, not far from Festus, on October 21st, 1995. When he was just 3 days old, he was adopted by Sandra and Jerome Harold, who took Travis to their home in Stamford, initially in an attempt to socialize him. The Herolds took Travis everywhere with them. Okay? They took him to work, and he often accompanied them on shopping trips to local supermarkets. Travis developed into an incredibly intelligent, capable animal. He could use keys to open doors, drink wine from a stemmed glass, water plants, feed horses, and even dress himself. Additionally, he was so fond of ice cream that he knew the schedule of passing ice cream trucks by heart. The Herolds claimed Travis could operate a computer and use the TV remote. He was very enthusiastic about watching sports. Travis appeared in several TV shows and commercials, and Old Navy. He also appeared on the Maury Povich Show, The Man Show, and in a TV pilot featuring Sheryl Crow and Michael Moore. It wasn't long before Travis was known not just in his hometown. He was known throughout the United States. But although Travis grew up around humans and was socialized to a certain degree, he wasn't exactly perfectly behaved. October 2003. Travis escaped from the Herald's vehicle at a busy intersection. He was loose for several hours and held up traffic. Incident reportedly began when a pedestrian threw something at the car. It flew through a half-open window and hit Travis while they were at a traffic light. Startled and angry, Travis immediately unbuckled his seatbelt, opened the car door, and chased after the man, but he didn't catch him. When the police arrived, they lured the chimpanzee back into the car several times, only for Travis to let himself out again through another door and occasionally chase the officers around the car. The incident led to the passing of a law in Connecticut prohibiting from keeping primates weighing more than about 22 kgs as pets and introducing a permit requirement for exotic pets. The Connecticut Department of Environmental Protection did not enforce the law on the Heralds because they had owned the roughly 91 Codge Travis for so long that it was assumed Traspovis posed no risk to public safety. February 16th, 2009, Charla Nash, a 55-year-old friend of Sandra Herald, came to visit. When she arrived, she realized that Travis had taken Sandra's car keys and refused to give them back to get Travis back into the house so they could get the keys. Charla Nash took one of Travis's favorite toys, Tickle Me Elmo, and showed it to the chimpanzee. Travis knew Nash. She had also worked at the Herald family's towing company. However, Nash had a different hairstyle at the time of the attack, which possibly confused and unsettled the chimpanzee. To everyone's absolute horror, Travis began to attack Charla Nash, inflicting devastating injuries to her face and limbs. Hugh, Sandra Herald, then 70 years old, tried to stop Travis by hitting him with a shovel and stabbing him with a butcher knife. The chimpanzee turned to her, she later said, as if to ask, "Why are you doing this, Mom?" But that didn't end the attack. The contrary, the animal became even angrier. Herald then called 911. Travis's screams can be heard in the background of the recording, while Sandra begs for police. Responders initially thought the call was a prank until Sandra screamed something that sent a shiver down the dispatcher's spine. "He's eating her." Oh my God. The emergency services waited for armed police support out of fear before approaching the house. When the patrol car arrived, Travis went to the vehicle, tried to open a locked passenger door, and smashed the side mirror. Then he walked calmly to the driver's door, opened it, and at that moment a police officer shot him several times. Screaming in pain, Travis fled back into the house, where he was eventually found dead next to his cage. The rescue teams described Nash's injuries as absolutely horrifying. In the following hours, Nash underwent almost 8 hours of surgery on her face and hands, performed by 4 separate teams of surgeons. Before matches, the hospital offered counseling to the staff who had initially treated her because of the extraordinarily brutal nature of her wounds. Paramedics noted that she had lost her hands, nose, eyes, lips, and large parts of the mid-face bone structure. She had also suffered severe brain tissue injuries. Doctors reattached her jaw, but announced in April 2009 that Nash would be blind for life. Because of her injuries, she was considered a possible candidate for an experimental face transplant. After initial treatment at Stamford Hospital, Nash was transferred to the Cleveland Clinic in Cleveland, Ohio. Her family set up a trust fund to raise money for the unimaginable treatment costs and to support their daughter. Nash showed her disfigured face publicly for the first time on The Oprah Winfrey Show on November 11th, 2009. At that time, she continued to be in severe physical pain, and relatives said she hoped to leave the Cleveland Clinic soon. Later, pictures surfaced online showing Nash's face before and after the attack. 2 years later, Nash underwent a transplant performed by a team at the Harvard Teaching Hospital, Brigham and Women's Hospital. She received a donated face and hands. The hand transplant was initially successful, but because Nash developed pneumonia shortly thereafter, doctors were forced to remove the newly transplanted hands due to the infection and resulting poor circulation, in accordance with standard procedure. Travis's head was taken to a state lab for rabies testing, and his blood went to the University of Connecticut for autopsy. His brain tested negative for rabies. However, there was evidence that Xanax was still present in his system. The autopsy findings from 2009 confirmed that the chimpanzee was overweight and had deep stab wounds on his back and sides. The remains were cremated at All Pets Crematory in Stamford on February 25, 2009. The toxicology reports confirmed Sandra's statement. She had given Travis tea laced with Xanax on the day of the attack, which could have increased his aggression. Xanax is considered a potent, acting anxiety medication that can cause disinhibition and disorientation and occasionally paradoxical reactions like rage and manic states. On May 25, 2010, almost a year and a half after the attack, Harold died at the age of 72 from a rupture of the main artery, an aortic aneurysm. Ms. Matches. Harold had suffered a series of heartbreaking losses in the years prior, beginning with the death of her daughter, who died in a car accident, then the death of her husband, then the death of her beloved chimpanzee Travis, and finally the tragic mutilation of her friend and employee Charla Nash. In the end, her heart, which had been broken so many times, could not take any more. Next horror story. When I was in college, Matches, sat for a family for a few years whenever they went on vacation with the whole family each year. I had a handful of other creepy, eerie experiences. But the one I want to talk about today was the one that made me stop house sitting for them. I was in my early 20s and trying to make ends meet. House sitting was one of many side jobs I had. The family would go abroad for a 2-week vacation and would have no reception there. So, if anything went wrong, I would have to call the police for Matches or their relatives depending on the situation. Bertha Kaiches, me for matters. Please keep in mind that I had a few creepy experiences with their house before. He asked me for Matches, but it had never been bad enough to scare me off because they paid me very well. Matches, I had previously worked in an animal shelter, so I knew a lot about animal care and knew a lot about cat behavior. This family had 4 cats, all of whom were very well behaved. For the first few days, everything was fine. Matches. I slept in the guest room and walked to college from their house because they lived close enough that I could just walk to class and didn't have to pay parking fees or bring lunch because I could just go back to their place. Then the problem started. After a few days, me for matches. My boyfriend at the time came over with dinner to keep me company because he knew the house always gave me the creeps a bit. We sat in the guest room and watched TV for a few hours while we ate until he said he had to go home. Sometimes he stayed overnight, but that night he told me he had a strong gut feeling that he needed to sleep at home. He also had me to go home because that gut feeling felt really bad. At that point, it was about midnight, and to be honest, I didn't want to go home. To put it bluntly, I have a complicated family life and didn't get along with my parents. The only time I got a break from home was this house, sitting once a year, and I didn't want to waste that. My only sibling, who was also my closest confidant, had moved out because of the toxic atmosphere at home, and honestly, home wasn't really a home anymore without that person. I told him everything would be fine, and I would lock up after he left. He was still very restless and tried to persuade me again to go home. He tried to explain that although he had slept there before, for some reason the house just felt unsettling tonight. He asked me for matches, because the house was over 100 years old, but it had just been renovated, so I felt better about it. I reminded him that there was an alarm system in the house that I always turned on. I said the area was safe and I had 4 friendly cats with me. He left reluctantly, drove home, and then it started. But I closed all the doors and windows, locked everything, and turned on the alarm system. Once I had made myself comfortable in bed, the TV turned on by itself. We had just used the TV, so I thought I had accidentally sat on the remote. But I saw the remote lying on the nightstand. I quickly turned it off again. As soon as it was off, it turned on again. I found this strange, because the TV had worked perfectly all evening. But even stranger was that when it turned on by itself, it jumped to a channel with no signal and white static, as if there was no reception. So I turned it off again and again, and it kept turning on. Matches. I started to panic and pulled the plug completely. Although I had had creepy experiences in this house before, something like this had never happened. I told myself the house had just been renovated. Maybe there were electrical problems. I didn't go home, but slept on the sofa instead. The next day my boyfriend came over again. I told him what had happened the night before, and he said I should have just gone home. I was pretty scared, but honestly, it still wasn't as bad as dealing with my family. That evening we ate together again and watched a movie in the living room. For the next part, I have to explain the layout of the house. The house has 2 levels. There is the ground floor, where you enter through the front door directly into the living room. And below that, the basement, which is basically like a very large living room, with another room used as an extra bedroom. The stairs down creak extremely loudly and seem really creepy. I don't understand why they didn't fix that during the renovation. Regarding the cats, they wanted to be everywhere and nowhere. Everyone had the quirk that they wanted to be near you, necessarily held or cuddled. Overall, they were rather quiet cats who liked a quieter environment. Cats, one was the youngest, about 3 years old, and he was just a little smaller than the other 3. That night, while we were watching the movie, my blood ran cold when I heard sounds from the basement that sounded like the crying of an infant. My boyfriend froze and turned slowly to me, as if to silently signal if I had heard it too. I remembered from my time at the shelter and from training that cats sometimes sound like babies, especially when they are in distress. Like I said, the cats liked to be near people and followed you through the house, but not so close that they wanted to cuddle. I counted and only got to 3. The younger, smaller male cat was missing. I assumed it must be the youngest and went down the stairs into the basement, where I found him locked in the extra room. He was smaller, but more energetic than the others. Somehow he had pulled the door shut behind him and was locked alone in the room. I carried him back up the stairs, and we continued the movie. In the middle of the movie, we paused because it was time to feed the cats. The owners had a strict feeding schedule. Matches. The feeding area was in the kitchen, and the kitchen was the only area connected to the basement. To describe the layout better, the main entrance leads into the living room. From the living room, goes into 2 different areas. Matches. One leads to the kitchen, the other leads to 3 bedrooms, an extra bedroom, the master bedroom, and another bedroom that belonged to the family's child. And the living room is also connected to the kitchen. The kitchen was the connection point to go through the kitchen to either go to the basement or back to the living room with these cats. The only time they didn't want to be near humans was while they were eating and directly after, to take a nap or rest with a full belly. They liked to sleep in the parents' bedroom or the teenager's room because it smelled like their family there. They did this every year. I had looked after them, so it was nothing new, and it wasn't unusual not to see them for a while after eating. We finished the movie and went into the kitchen, where not a single cat was to be seen. While we enjoyed our dinner, we both heard that whimpering from the basement again. It was naturally louder because we were in the kitchen, which is closer to the basement. He asked me for matches. I didn't see any cats in the kitchen and didn't think to check the living room because I was internally panicking. My boyfriend was visibly frightened, and I said I would check because it was probably the male cat again, but I couldn't ignore that the crying sounded a little different than before. It was more frequent and shriller. I turned on the light in the basement and crept slowly down the stairs, saying the cat's name with every step, louder. But when I finally got to the bottom, it stopped abruptly. I checked the extra room, every corner and under the sofa. He was nowhere. At that moment, I was so scared that I could hear my heartbeat in my head. I don't even walk regularly, definitely don't jog, and I certainly don't run, but I ran up those stairs as if my life depended on it. When I got back to the kitchen, my whole body went ice cold, and my heart sank. My boyfriend was standing in the kitchen with a look of horror on his face, and all 4 cats were around him. He told me that while I was going down the stairs, because of the crying, all 4 cats had come out of the bedroom area at the same time. No cat had been down in the basement the whole time. I packed my things immediately, and without a word, for matches, stuffed everything into my backpack, and we both left the house for the rest of the week. Only once a day to clean the litter box and feed them. I know I violated their feeding schedule, but in that moment I really didn't care. After the last day, I locked up, put the keys in their hiding spot, thanked them for the opportunity, but said it was the last time and I was never coming back. I hated that house, and looking back, the experiences I had every year seemed like they were escalating further and further. Matches. I should have stopped much sooner. I still remember calling my sibling on the drive to my parents' house after the incident. Men asked me, well, even worse. I found it worse when my sibling told me that they had also had their own experience in that house and kept it a secret from me because they knew I wanted to save money to move out and didn't want to scare me. Next horror story. When I signed the lease, I didn't ask any questions. The rent was cheap. The area was quiet. Needed to get out of my last apartment as soon as possible. It was a 1-story house. Nothing special. 2 bedrooms. Walls the color of wet sand. The carpet had stains. The windows jammed. And the whole house smelled of cleaning products. I didn't care. I just wanted a fresh start. Puppy Luna. She was 5 months old, small, nervous, and still getting used to the leash. She followed me everywhere. When I left the room, she started whining. We were close, maybe too close. But when you live alone and hardly talk to anyone, a dog can feel like a second heartbeat. The first few days were normal. Unpacked, assembled a crappy desk, and figured out how the stove worked. Luna settled in quickly, until she didn't. I was washing dishes. Then she started barking towards the hallway. Not a normal bark. She was loud, aggressive, and completely fixated. I looked over and saw her standing stiffly, tail down, eyes fixed on the wall next to the hallway door. I thought maybe she heard a mouse or water in the pipes, but she didn't stop. I went over, checked the wall. It was solid. Luna backed away, as if she didn't want me near it. That was the first time I felt that pull in my stomach, that silent, sharp alertness. Something was wrong. I didn't know how deep it went. During the day, Luna didn't bark. Normal, ate, slept, played. But as soon as it got dark, she sat near the hallway and just stared, without barking, just frozen, ears back, eyes fixed on that wall. Exactly on the same spot. I even put a chair in front of it to see if she would look somewhere else. She didn't. She just moved a bit and kept staring. I recorded her with my mobile phone, mainly to laugh about how strangely she was behaving. There was nothing to see on the recording, just her frozen and then barking like crazy. She looked terrified, but there was nothing in the frame. That was the worst part. There was nothing to explain it. Just her reacting to something I couldn't see. On the third night, the hallway curtain had a rip right down the middle. Maybe Luna had jumped up and got stuck with a claw, but she was too small to get that high, cleanly from top to bottom. I ran my fingers over the edges. They were smooth, not frayed, chewed. The same night I heard it. It was quiet, but steady, a knocking too gentle to be just the wood settling. It came from the wall she was staring at. I stood near her and listened. 3 knocks, then nothing. I pressed my hand against the drywall and held it there, cold, still. Then, just as I was about to step back, I felt it. A single knock from the other side, deliberately firm. Matches. I backed away and didn't go near that wall for the rest of the night. I started locking my bedroom door at night. I don't know why. It just made me feel in control, even if I wasn't. Luna refused to sleep in the living room anymore. She whined until I let her into the bedroom, and then she curled up next to the bed facing the hallway, always watchful. At 3:09 a.m. I woke up because the hallway light was flickering. I hadn't turned it on, and off by itself like a strobe light. I sat up and listened. It was dead silent. Then I heard 3 knocks again, this time louder, not behind the wall, at my door. Didn't move. I just stared at the doorknob waiting to see if it would turn. Something scraped across the wood, long, dragging, like nails over the surface. Then silence. I sat there till it got light. In the morning, I opened the door in daylight. No marks, no footprints, matches, but I found something else. The picture frame on the hallway wall had been turned upside down. Otherwise, nothing was changed. Not the table, not the shelves, just this one picture turned around, as if someone had done it very slowly. In the afternoon, I noticed 3 scratches along my arm, thin, evenly spaced, like fingers. I couldn't remember how I got them, but they burned when I showered. That evening Luna didn't bark. She hid. I found her wedged between the sofa and the wall, and she refused to come out. Mobile phone on record again. Around 3:15 a.m. the hallway curtain moved, not like from wind. It lifted slowly and then fell back down. No draft. The window was closed. It moved as if someone had lifted it. The recording showed nothing else, but Luna didn't sleep for the next 24 hours. I bought cameras, real ones, not just my mobile phone, motion activated, with night vision, one for the hallway, one for the living room. I set them up and didn't tell anyone. I didn't want advice. I didn't want comfort. I wanted proof. On the first night, the recording had a glitch. Full minutes of static exactly at 3:11 a.m. Before that, the hallway was empty. After that, the curtain was slashed cleanly down the middle again. I watched the recording 10 times. Nothing visible, just the curtain intact, then static, then shredded. On the second night, the living room camera showed Luna running in circles. She barked a single time till she hit the wall. Her whole body was shaking. She looked towards the hallway. Something walked past. Human-like, pale, skinny. I paused the recording and went through frame by frame. That wasn't a trick of the light. That was real. I didn't sleep that night. I kept Luna in my room with the door locked. She didn't want to eat. She stared at the wall and whimpered. I heard scratching sounds on the ceiling. And then around 3:10 a.m., something hit the wall from inside so hard that the picture frames shook. I jumped out of bed, grabbed Luna, and hid in the bathroom. I stayed there until morning. On the third night, I watched the live feed from the camera on my laptop. I couldn't sleep anyway, so I sat at the kitchen table, under my chair. Everything was quiet until 3:11 a.m. Then the motion sensor in the hallway triggered. At first nothing. Then, from the left edge of the frame, something crawled out of the wall. It didn't open anything. It didn't break anything. It simply came through as if the wall wasn't there. It was tall, but hunched. The arms dragged behind. The skin looked wrong, almost transparent. It had no face, just smooth skin and deep hollows where eyes should have been. It stood up fully, turned its head, and looked directly into the camera, not at the lens, at me. When I saw that on the feed, then I heard something creak in the hallway. In reality, not on the recording. Something was moving. I slammed the laptop shut and grabbed Luna. She barked once, high and panicked. Something crashed against the wall from the other side. Then silence. Avrages, I didn't breathe. I waited. Then the hallway light flickered a single time and went out. Only opened the door when the sun had risen. When I watched the camera, recording again, later, the thing walked down the hallway and into the kitchen. It stood there for 2 minutes. Didn't move, just stared at the table. Then it went backwards, back into the wall and disappeared. I watched it again and again. Once, never touched her. It was as if she didn't exist. I didn't stay a night longer. Everything in an hour. Stuffed clothes into trash bags. Took Luna, my laptop, and drove off. I didn't tell the landlord anything. I didn't care. I left the keys in the mailbox and never looked back. I took a room in a small guest house for a week. Luna didn't bark a single time. Schlepp, I didn't. I watched the last clips on the camera. The last one showed my bedroom door opening by itself. The thing was inside, standing next to my bed, watching me sleep. I didn't move. Luna didn't react. It stood there for 10 minutes. Then it turned around and went back through the wall. I deleted the recordings that night. I don't care if anyone believes me. I feel like that creature is somehow still there if I keep the recordings. We live in a different home now, a small apartment. Luna sleeps by the door. She eats, she plays. She is normal again. I'm not. At 3:11 a.m., I don't know why, I check every wall in the apartment. I leave the light on. I keep my mobile phone in recording mode every night, but I never press record. I don't want proof anymore. I just want to keep breathing. Some nights Luna growls in her sleep. When she does that, I stay awake until sunrise. I don't blink. I just stare at the wall and wait. Next horror story. Happiest day of my life was the day my family moved into our first real home together. Wife and I had finally scraped together enough of our savings to buy a house in the suburbs, a big old 3-story thing that looked like it was straight out of a storybook. Perfect feeling of domestic bliss. We bought a dog. Our 6-year-old daughter had wanted one since she could speak. Doggy, and then good doggy. She pointed at them in parks, smiled and giggled when she saw them in her first picture books. It became a sort of early obsession for her. So the day after the happiest day of my life was the second happiest. Matches. The day I got to see the look in my daughter's eyes when we brought home the dog of her dreams. A Labradoodle named Elsa, after a few months in such a quiet, nice neighborhood. Something happened that made us all extremely nervous. The first missing pet poster didn't cause too much alarm yet. Sure, it was terrible for the family whose dog had disappeared. Their children were devastated, but at the risk of sounding heartless, things like that happen, especially because the area we lived in was often visited by coyotes looking for leftover garbage food. One of the first things I did was make sure the garden fence in our backyard was high and sturdy. When the second missing pet poster appeared, the neighborhood became significantly more concerned. At a homeowners association meeting, people talked about whether maybe cougars, birds of prey, even bears, could be responsible for the missing pets. In the end, everyone agreed that we had to keep our eyes open, whatever was behind it. One evening, a few weeks after that meeting, I was home alone making myself a quick bite to eat in the kitchen. My wife was out with our daughter and our dog. Elsa was in the backyard. Elsa had always been quite talkative. She barked or howled at anything and anyone, so occasional barking wasn't anything I worried about much. And if she was protecting the neighborhood from coyotes with it, then be my guest. I didn't care if it was a bit annoying. Matches. So I was done with my sandwich and sitting in the living room, watching some baseball highlights. Spaxhours, the Red Sox were losing as usual, and just as usually Elsa was barking like crazy in the backyard. Nothing particularly unusual, you know. I even laughed a little to myself and thought she was probably just as annoyed by another lousy season as I was. King suddenly became more intense out of nowhere. Much more intense. It wasn't just barking anymore. A mix of barking, howling, and whining, as if something was very close and she was afraid of it or something. So I went out to the backyard, calmed her down a bit and petted her, before I shoved my head over the fence to check if everything was clear. I had half expected to see a small pack of coyotes, or God forbid a black bear, but there was nothing, absolutely nothing in the woods behind the house. Matches. Maybe she had just caught the scent of a squirrel or something. Something small that could be prey, and that got her so riled up. I went back inside to enjoy the game, or not enjoy it, whatever. Because about half an hour later, that same panic barking started all over again. Immediately, before he asked me for matches, went towards the back door because I wanted to bring Elsa inside so we wouldn't get in trouble for noise or complaints from neighbors. As soon as I started walking, I saw something that almost made my heart stop. Elsa was barking. Yes, she was barking at the silhouette of a man trying to climb over our fence. And she was barking at a guy who was already in our backyard. dressed all in black with a face mask. He was holding a leash in his hand, a leash he wanted to attach to Elsa's collar. I reacted immediately and stormed through the back door into the garden and screamed at them to get lost. At that moment I saw the gun on the man's belt. Because I panicked. Because I realized I had nothing to defend myself with and ran back into the house to get a knife. But when I turned around, the guy had already drawn the gun. I ran further into the house, locked the door, grabbed my phone, and hammered the emergency number 911 into the screen. Because all were some of the longest moments of my entire life. Hanging on the phone with the dispatcher and not knowing if the gunman was breaking in and shooting me, or if I would hear a single shot in the backyard any second, because the guy gave up and disposed of Elsa to have no witnesses. The person on the phone strongly advised me against it, but I couldn't help myself and crept downstairs anyway to take a look into the garden. I had no idea what image would await me, but I was overwhelmed with relief when I saw that Elsa was there, right at the back door wagging her tail. No trace of intruders in the garden. When the police arrived, I gave them a description and all that stuff. But I honestly didn't think it would do any good. Seemed like professionals, prepared, armed, masked. And then the officers told me that they already had a lead, a gang stealing thoroughbred horses and popular dog breeds to sell them across state lines. Professional dog thieves. Can you imagine that? The officers had done what they could and were just about to drive off when I stroked Elsa under the chin. When I pulled my hand back, there was blood on it. My jaw dropped. I looked at the officers. They looked at me. Apparently, they weren't completely without a lead after all. In short, a forensics team came and set everything up at the back of the house. Looked for blood traces. They actually found something. This dog theft in itself isn't a huge crime. But because the perpetrators were armed, it fell under violent burglary of an occupied home, and that brought a significantly stronger police presence. They didn't even need the DNA. The police arrested a man for stealing medical supplies from a pharmacy. When they looked at him more closely in the county jail, he had a dog bite on his left forearm. They got a search warrant for his apartment and found 3 missing dogs there, locked in tiny cages. Horrific conditions to keep an animal in. Matches. They charged him with violent burglary instead of just dog theft, because that carries a much higher sentence. We were at his preliminary hearing at the district court. It turned out that the guy was an Aleut scumbag with a criminal record longer than a Stephen King book. What else do you expect from someone who tries to steal a family's dog right out of their own backyard? The lesson here: watch your pets. You never know who is watching. Next horror story. Sometimes people ask me why I became a vet, and honestly, if I had known that I would be dealing with terrifying, biting terriers, panicked piglets, or even cows stuck in trees, I might have seriously considered a completely different profession. But since I was 9 years old, I wanted nothing more than to help animals. Matches. My mother and father believe It's because as a child I accidentally threw my teddy bear into the fire and could never forgive myself for not being able to fix the burn mark it caused. 2003, after 5 years of hard study at the University of Manchester, I finally graduated as a vet. After that, I worked in North Yorkshire for 8 years before moving to Lincolnshire, Matches, where I was initially a partner in the practice in Horncastle and later became the sole owner of the Benevolent Veterinary Group, where we have been treating the medical problems of both farm animals and pets since 2013 until today. Since it is my dream job, I find the work incredibly fulfilling. But it also has its downsides, especially weekend and night shifts. I miss many important family moments because of it, and I can't tell you how much that fills me with regret. Veterinary emergencies usually fall into one of 3 categories. We call this A, B, or C, true emergencies, B for births, and C for collapses. However, there is a kind of eerie 4th possibility that nobody likes to talk about. We call it D for danger. Over the course of my career, I have dealt with many risky or simply dangerous animals, but there was only one time I felt truly in serious danger of actually being injured or even killed. That was when I had the seemingly simple task of vaccinating an English Bull Terrier. Contrary to some rumors, English Bull Terriers are usually a breed that is good to work with. However, if they are in a bad mood, they can be very difficult to treat safely. In this case, the owners parked in front of the clinic and initially refused to bring the dog inside at all. They explained that this was because there were other dogs in the waiting room, but it didn't take long until I suspected that there were completely different behavioral problems behind it. Instead of leading him inside, they tied his 2 leashes to a railing outside and pulled them so tight that the dog could hardly move. When I went out, he was already growling and baring his teeth, obviously under massive stress. Most owners are terribly upset when we have to restrain their animals, and some refuse injections completely, even though the treatment is meant to help the animal. These owners, however, seem to have no problem doing that themselves. I found that deeply disturbing. Nevertheless, I quickly decided now is not the time to play the hero. Other patients were waiting to be seen. I had to get the job done first and maybe ask the animal welfare authorities for a check later. Nervously, I went to the tied-up terrier and applied the needle as gently as I could. He yelped and howled in pain and increased his efforts to free himself even more. I felt a pang of fear as his violent struggling caused both collars to slip forward and slide over his head. The raging dog was almost free. The wife of the owner couple started screaming immediately. "Oh my God! Quick, back into the damn practice! Back in the damn practice!" I am not the type to simply ignore such advice, but I had a big problem. This angry, barking bundle of growling aggression stood exactly between me and the door. He arches. One have been to jump onto the roof of a nearby parked van before he asked me for matches. But I discarded it immediately when I realized that the dog could probably jump significantly higher than I could. Besides, It was important not to show too much fear in front of the other customer watching the whole thing through the clinic window. Still, I was absolutely panicked. My only realistic option was to take a running start and jump over him, sprint to the door, slam it shut behind me, and then play the friendly smiling vet inside, while the grinning customers in the waiting area watched. To my absolute shock, I actually managed that. I never saw that bull terrier again. As a vet, not only life and limbs can be at stake. Sometimes it's also your hearing that takes a beating. As a vet in training, we had to gain experience with a whole range of animals, and I got an internship on a pig farm. Incident: old piglets. Weak old piglets were supposed to be moved across the yard into a larger pen area where they would have more space and freedom of movement. A few of us moved the sow from the crate into the new area and left her there, held only by a metal barrier 1 meter high. Then we went back to get the piglets. Only in this case, the new area was a bit too big. Our big mistake was moving the sow first, because what do little piglets do when they are stressed and can't find their mother? They squeal loudly, deafeningly loud, of their lungs. I was the first to arrive at the new area with the piglets, and at that exact moment, the sow ran to her squealing young and jumped up, propping her front legs on top of the barrier, grunting and moaning, with open mouth, just inches from my face. Have you ever seen a pig's teeth? They can be terribly sharp if they haven't been trimmed properly. I might be a little crazy, but I'm definitely not stupid. I did the only possible thing and threw the screaming little things into the pen area. They ran obediently to safety, and so did I. Then came the guy behind me, also with squealing piglets. But the sow decided on a different method this time. Before, a racehorse, she took a running start and leaped over the barrier with a single bound. My colleague with the piglets jumped to the side and had no choice but to drop the piglets and make way. The sow was huge. I'd even want to think about how much damage she would have caused if she had actually caught one of us. Over the course of my career, I have endured all kinds of injuries. Stapling my finger to a lamb's genitals is a particularly memorable moment, but the most severe injury I ever suffered actually happened outside of work. I love long-distance running. I was involved in a near-fatal accident during a race, and the injuries I suffered, unfortunately, ended my clinical career as a vet. I still haven't gotten used to the thought of not being a real vet anymore. I miss getting my hands dirty and the contact with the clients and their animals. On some level, I even miss being attacked, chased, falling down, and being surprised anew every day. Next horror story. I just wanted to take a recording of my dogs that evening. That was the plan. Nothing special. I was sitting on the floor in the dining room, phone in hand, filming them while they wrestled with each other and constantly tripped over one another, just like they always do. 9 p.m. Only the lights in the kitchen and dining area were on. The rest of the apartment was dark, including the long hallway that led to the bedrooms and the apartment door. to keep the dogs from running around and making a mess. One of those child safety gates at the beginning of the hallway. They never liked going down there anyway. Too dark, too quiet. They always stayed close to me, and I was fine with that. That evening, however, something was wrong. They weren't wrestling like usual. They froze. All three just stared into the hallway. I lowered the phone and thought, maybe they had heard someone outside. Ears were pricked, bodies tense, tails stiff. One of them let out a low growl. I followed their gaze. At first, I couldn't make anything out. The hallway was pitch black, but then I saw it too. Just above the top edge of the gate, the shadows near the bedroom door, a face pale, motionless, with hollow eyes staring right at us. I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just stared back, trying to tell myself it was a trick of the light. Maybe something hanging on the door, a poster, anything, just not a person. But it blinked. I saw the slow, deliberate movement of the lids. It wasn't a strange object. It was someone. I always kept it locked. It was the 8th floor. No balconies, no fire escapes. Some to just walk in. And yet he was there, staring at me and my dogs, as if he had been there for hours, as if he knew I would eventually see him. I didn't have wireless internet. I had been meaning to set it up for a long time, but I hadn't gotten around to it. Had no reception either. Thick concrete walls. I was completely cut off. I whispered to the dogs, tried to move slowly. They just stood there, frozen. I stood up and took a step towards the hallway. The figure didn't move. That made it worse. As if he was waiting for something or someone. There was a pause long enough for the tension to knot in my chest, my throat to tighten, and my breathing to slow. It felt like time wasn't moving forward. The face didn't twitch, didn't lean forward, did nothing. That's exactly what made it feel more real, more dangerous. I grabbed the nearest chair and raised it like a weapon. If you don't get out of here, I'll release the dogs. Nothing. A voice came from the hallway, calm, friendly, like someone calling a child in from playing. Come here. Unbelievably, one of them started wagging his tail and trotted towards the hallway. I reached out to grab him. I was too slow. He jumped over the gate and disappeared into the darkness. There was a short yelp, then silence. I didn't move. I couldn't tell if I was more afraid for my dog or terrified of what was behind that face. The other 2 dogs backed away, whining. I couldn't abandon him, but I also couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Then the lights went out. Every single bulb in my apartment died at the same moment. I was in total darkness. I fell to my knees and frantically fumbled for my phone, hoping to use the flashlight. The moment I turned it on, I saw him, behind the gate, in the hallway. The light hit only part of his face. The corner of his mouth was twisted into a smile. He whispered something I didn't understand, but I saw his lips move. Then he took a step towards me. I backed away. Now I could hear him walking. Slow steps, bare feet on wood. No hurry. He knew I was trapped. The 2 dogs growled, but they didn't charge. I wanted to scream, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. No one would hear it. I ducked behind the kitchen island and tried to calm my breathing. he wasn't in a hurry. That was the part that scared me the most. He walked like he belonged here, like he knew every inch of the apartment, like this was his home and not mine. He moved suddenly fast. One moment he was still about 3 meters away. The next he was on top of me. I struck with the phone and hit his jaw. He grunted, but didn't fall. His hands grabbed for my throat. I bit him so hard that blood flowed. He screamed and pulled back. I ripped up one of the dining chairs and shoved it between us. He slapped it away as if it were made of paper. The dogs lunged forward, barking like mad. Then one of them bit into his leg. He kicked him so hard that I heard my dog yelp and hit the wall. I scrambled for anything, no matter what. I found a fork on the table and stabbed blindly. I felt it go into something. He howled, but he didn't stop. He grabbed me by the hair and yanked me backward. My head hit the floor hard. For a moment, everything went blurry. I tried to crawl away. He climbed on top of me, trying to pin me down. I scratched, hooed, anything to keep him from getting to my throat again. Then he said something very quietly, right in my ear. "I've been watching you for weeks." That made me go numb inside. I had thought he had just broken in. I hadn't known he had planned this. I fought even harder. The dogs came back. One jumped on his back and bit down his ankle. He lost his balance. I used that to push him off me. We both scrambled up. He wanted to run away, but the dogs blocked his path. Maybe he thought he could climb down. I grabbed the only heavy thing nearby, the floor lamp. He stumbled, fell towards the window. It wasn't open, but the glass was thin. He crashed through it. I saw his body disappear, flailing, 8 stories down, then silence. I collapsed on the floor, panting, shaking. Licked my face. The other stood at the hallway door and barked. I walked over slowly. The flashlight shook in my hand. There he was, the missing dog. Safe, scared, but unharmed. The psychopath had simply locked him in there. The police didn't believe me at first, until they found his body and discovered the camera hidden behind the vent cover in my bedroom. For weeks, he had watched everything. They told me his name. I didn't care. I didn't even want to know. He was just a lunatic who thought he could make me a part of his little project. I moved out and found an apartment on the 3rd floor with wireless internet and window bars on every window. They sleep near me every night. I still keep the child's safety gate, not because of them, me for matches, but because I need to know if they ever freeze again. If they ever stare into the hallway like that again, like that night, I'll be ready. Next horror story. I am 28 years old. I have loved animals since I was a child, and that's why I chose a career path that has to do with animals. I work as a veterinary assistant, but for a while I also had a small side job. I offer to look after people's pets at their homes, when they went on vacation, and so on. This ranged from cats to dogs to insects and birds. Matches. A few times I actually looked after animals for whole weekends. For people who presumably didn't have family who could have taken over. As a young woman who also works in a veterinary clinic anyway. He asked me for matches. Most people weren't deterred by the idea of me staying in their house while they were away. I wasn't just some random person off the street. My qualifications were all over the net. One day I got a reply to my ad from a man named Jeremy who wanted my services. He had an approximately 20-year-old macaw and a cat, and he needed someone to look after both for a weekend while he went away. He offered a price immediately and offered me $300 for the whole weekend. I accepted the offer because that was a fair deal. I have experience with birds of all kinds, including macaws, but it would have been the first time I looked after a macaw for a whole weekend. I met Jeremy at his home. It was a completely normal corner house in this residential area. He was a small man, probably in his late 50s with graying hair and a graying mustache. He seemed very friendly, in my experience. Most animal lovers are. After I met Jeremy, he introduced me to his bird Ringo and his cat Casper. Ringo was huge. I had handled macaws before, and I assumed that was one of the reasons Jeremy had hired me. He told me about Ringo's character and how to calm him down if he makes noise. Ringo kept saying, "Daddy's home," while Jeremy was holding him. He always says that when he sees him. Ringo also said a few other sentences, all short 2 or 3 word sentences. After showing me how to clean the cage and things like that, he showed me the rest of the house and explained how often I should feed Casper. He asked me not to go into other bedrooms upstairs, except the guest room where I would be sleeping, which was understandable. The bathroom upstairs was right next to the room, and he said I could help myself to his food. However, I am vegan, so I brought my own food for the weekend. After all that, and getting to know me a bit, he gave me the house key and drove off. I watched through the window as he drove away, and suddenly I was alone with Ringo and Casper. It was already late at this point, around 8 p.m. It was dark outside, so there wasn't much left to do for that evening. Casper was already fed, and Jeremy had already put enough food in Ringo's cage to last for the night. The cage was in the living room, pretty much in the center of the house, right next to the TV. So I turned on the TV and plopped down on the sofa. Casper was hiding somewhere in the house, so I didn't see him. Was just sitting in the cage watching me. After a few hours of TV and my little dinner, I went to bed. There was no reason to stay awake extremely late. I slept with the bedroom door open. In the middle of the night, I woke up to a sound. The best way I can describe it is cracking sounds. I sat up and listened for a moment. Nothing. So I lay back down and went back to sleep. There was a huge bird in a cage downstairs. Hearing noises wasn't unexpected. The next day was pretty uncomplicated. Casper's litter box fed him and fed Ringo. I let Ringo out for a few hours so he could exercise. He sat on the back of the sofa behind me while I watched TV. Jeremy had told me that Casper and Ringo usually ignore each other, so I didn't have to worry about one attacking the other. A few hours later, I left the house to explore the area a bit. I walked in the park and made video calls with a few friends. I also drove around a bit and got food for dinner before returning to the house. It was around 7 p.m. when I got back. I busied myself with the animals for a few more hours while eating and watching TV. Jeremy wasn't supposed to come home until late the next day. I called it a night early again. I went to sleep with the door open again. I woke up to a sound. This time I was pretty sure I had heard the bedroom door slam shut. I looked up and realized the door was now closed. Although the windows were open, there was hardly any to no wind that could have caused a draft. That was weird. Also, I heard noises from downstairs. Ringo was moving in his cage and talking. I got out of bed to check and make sure he was okay. As I went down the stairs, I heard him speaking more clearly. I got to the cage and saw he was wide awake and pacing back and forth. I remembered what Jeremy had said to calm him down, give him a specific treat. I reached into the bag to get one out, but then he said the sentence, "Daddy's home." I found that strange and a bit creepy. I held the treat out to Ringo, and he snatched it. That actually made him calm down. Matches. But it still felt weird that he was awake in the middle of the night. I went back to the bedroom, left the door open again, sleep again, and I swear I'm not making this up. Maybe a little over an hour later, I woke up yet again. This time I didn't hear what had woken me, but I looked around groggily, and in the almost pitch black darkness of the room, I saw a black figure in the middle of the room, moving away from the bed and out the door. I sat up and almost screamed, until I came to my senses properly. Now I had to ask myself if what I had just seen was a hallucination or not. I reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, but on the screen, I saw that I had received a message from Jeremy about an hour ago, but it was normal. If Ringo makes noises in the middle of the night, and I should just ignore it. I stared at the screen and read the message surely 10 times. It had come precisely around the time I had gotten up to give Ringo a treat. I suddenly felt sick. That black figure in the room I had just seen. What if that had been real? What if it wasn't a hallucination? I got out of bed and turned on the bedside lamp. I started packing my bag as fast as possible. I didn't have many things with me, so I was done very quickly. Quietly, I went into the bathroom next door, hastily grabbed my toiletries, and then crept back out. I stood in the almost pitch black hallway upstairs with all the bedroom doors. Before he asked me for matches, I looked down the hallway, and I could have sworn I heard the faintest sound from one of the rooms. I don't know why, but an overwhelming curiosity, almost like mesmerized me, made me creep down the hallway to what I thought was the master bedroom. I put my ear close to the door, and I heard a rattling sound, like a bed shaking. He was in there, that disgusting creep, and said, "Jeremy, are you in there?" The shaking stopped, and now there was only dead silence. Repeated myself and said this time, "If you are in the house, I need to know that right now before I leave." Again silence. Matches. I left the house in a hurry, left the key on the table, and didn't look back once on the drive home. I sent him a long voice message saying I was considering reporting this to the authorities for stalking or invasion of privacy, and that I was deeply disturbed because he had been in the house. He tried to call me 3 times immediately, but honestly, I was too scared to answer. Then he wrote me a message, apologized, and claimed his brother had come home unexpectedly that night. I knew that was complete nonsense. I demanded that he simply pay me, and I wouldn't pursue the matter further. He sent me the money via Zelle, a payment service, and that was that. I hate mentioning this part at all, but the next day I realized that a certain piece of clothing was missing from my bag. Then no, for a fact he had taken out of my bag. I have mostly repressed this memory. Matches. This is the first and last time I am writing down this experience in such detail. Next horror story. First, I'll start with descriptions of everyone involved. My name is Kelsey. I was 17 years old at the time of this event. My friend Haley is 5'7" tall. My friend Sammy is 5'7" tall. It was March 19, 2016. I was dog, sitting at a friend of my mother's house to earn some extra money before heading off to university the next year. It was a chilly spring night, and the people I was dog sitting for had a really great sunroom where my friends and I liked to smoke. So I decided to invite 2 other friends over to make this dog sitting more fun and have a sleepover. Haley was 23 and Sammy 22. They brought vodka that we wanted to drink. We hung out for a few hours, drank, smoked, laughed, and caught up. And then suddenly we kept getting calls. Normally that wouldn't have been weird, but the line was actually supposed to be disconnected. For matches. We ignored the first few calls, thinking the person would leave a message or call again in the morning, because it was almost midnight. But the calls didn't stop. We realized this person wouldn't leave us alone until we answered. Sammy decided to answer. On the other end was a man claiming he had the homeowner's wallet at a gas station about 25 minutes from the house. Sense. The man insisted we pick up the wallet immediately. We all found that extremely odd, after minutes of urging that it was urgent, and we had to come right now. Sammy finally got him to understand that we weren't leaving the house and would pick up the wallet the next morning. We hung up, and we all got a weird feeling in our stomachs. We grabbed the dog Willis, ran to the back bedroom, pulled down all the blinds, and locked the door. Our judgment was impaired anyway because of the cannabis and alcohol. Trumby, for he asked me for matches. We talked it through and decided we were just paranoid, and the man probably just wanted to make sure we returned the wallet safely to the owner. Hours passed where we drank and smoked some more. Then we decided to watch a funny movie and make something to eat to calm down and get ready for bed. We moved from the sunroom to the living room and put in a DVD for matches. The sunroom was between the kitchen and living room on one side and the garden by the pool on the other. The door between the pool area and the sunroom had no lock, but the door between the kitchen, living room, and sunroom had no doggy door for Willis to go out the back to do his business. So we all agreed. Even though the call had scared us a little, we were in a safe neighborhood and Willis would bark if anything came to the door. Time crawled by. We laughed on the sofas. Us Haley and I sat next to each other on one, and Sammy sat opposite on the other. It was exactly 3 a.m., and that's when things got scary. Do you remember we had left the lockable door? to the sunroom, opened so Willis could go out to pee. He came back in through that door too. I was completely absorbed in the comedy. But you know that inexplicable feeling that someone is watching you. That feeling suddenly became overwhelming. Matches. I turned to the kitchen and saw a dark figure crouching in the kitchen. I froze and thought for a moment. I was imagining it. Matches. I watched as this figure reached up into a cupboard, and then I realized someone was in the house, nudged Haley with my elbow, and said very quietly, "Haley, I think someone is in the house." She looked into the kitchen and screamed bloody murder. This dark figure then whipped his head around and looked directly at me. We locked eyes, and I felt my whole body tense up before he asked me for matches. All I could see were his piercing blue eyes standing out sharply against the orange light of the lamp sitting on the table right under the cupboard. Was covered by his black hoodie, pants, shoes, and gloves, even wearing a ski mask that went up over his nose and mouth. Sammy then stood up to see what Haley and I were staring at, and somehow mustered the courage to scream, "Get out of here." He quite calmly closed the cupboard and walked slowly out through the sunroom doors. We jumped up immediately to the corner of the room furthest from where he had been crouching and called 911. 3 minutes later they were there and searched the whole house, took our statements, me for matches, and sat outside the house for the rest of the night to see if the intruder would come back. The three of us didn't stay long enough to find out. We left our alcohol, the cannabis, we four, and even my car along with the police and the dog at the house and drove home. The next day we came back and found clothes all over the house, everything messed up, and there were crumbs and food scraps by the doggy door. Apparently, someone had sedated Willis with it, so he wouldn't bark when this person came in. To this day, we have no idea who called us and or who broke into that house. I haven't been back there since. Next horror story. The whole thing started when I moved in with my ex-girlfriend. Of course, she wasn't my ex back then. She was my girlfriend, and we were totally in love. It was one of those whirlwind romances. So after only 6 months of dating and countless hints from her that the big open loft apartment she called home was way too big for one person, I finally moved in. We were very different people, different personalities, different lifestyles. But you know the saying, opposites attract. One thing we definitely had in common was our love for animals. She kept a few smaller pets, a corn snake, a cockatiel, things like that. Only her love for nature went a bit further than mine. In the first few months of our relationship, she was a vegetarian, but not long after that she switched completely to vegan. That didn't bother me at all, because it didn't bother her that I ate meat. That was her personal choice. She even cooked for me occasionally with meat in it, and I would be lying if I claimed I didn't really appreciate that. After a while, we talked about getting a bigger pet, a dog maybe, or a cat, and that's how it is when a couple gets a pet. It's basically a dress rehearsal for a baby. If you can manage the care of the animal together and look after it together, chances are good that you are compatible enough to start a family at all. So one day, We headed to a local animal shelter to look at the dogs they had there. She was maybe a little indecisive about which one to take home. Supposedly she liked them all. But as soon as I saw this big, cuddly German shepherd, I knew immediately which one I wanted to take. It took some convincing, Matsing, because she was wavering between my choice and some smaller, cuter dogs that were also there. But eventually she was swayed, and we finally went home with the female German shepherd named Jazz. As I said, my ex was totally into this whole vegan thing, but she was also very much into organic food. I was fine with that. He asked me for matches. No question. The organic shop where she used to buy my chicken and pork actually had exceptionally good meat. He asked me, so when my ex mentioned she wanted to get a natural healthy dog food for Jazz, I thought that was good, of course. But when she brought home a bag of it for the first time, Jazz wouldn't touch it. I was pretty sure that was because I had spoiled her matches. Part of her training involved me getting a pack of grilled chicken at the supermarket and going to a nearby park with her to practice. If she was good, she got a piece of chicken. And if you get fresh chicken breast all day, understand why you don't feel like normal dog food. So the treats had to go. That sucked. But if it was necessary for Jazz to get used to her new home, then so be it. Only days passed and Jazz still refused to eat her dog food. She went to the bowl, sniffed it, and then simply trotted away, visibly disappointed by the offering. When she was really, really hungry, did she actually try to eat the stuff? We were relieved. My ex seemed particularly happy that Jazz finally started to feel at home. But not long after she had emptied the bowl, Jazz threw up all the organic dog food over the kitchen floor. We became extremely worried. For me personally, before he asked me, it boiled down to the fear that we might have unintentionally adopted a sick or dying dog, and that would be a nightmare animal only for it to die shortly after. I wasn't ready for that at all. So the search for the cause began. Before he chinged the next day I took Jazz straight to the vet, hoping an examination would shed light on the matter. And it did. I would never have expected to hear what I was told. This dog is severely malnourished, said the vet. That didn't necessarily come as a surprise, but the reason for it hit me like a blow. What exactly are you feeding her? Asked the vet. I explained that my girlfriend at the time was giving her this organic stuff. The vet looked skeptical immediately. He asked me kindly to go home and then call him with the name of the dog food so he could look at it himself. I don't want to name an exact brand name here or anything. I don't want to get sued for defamation. I honestly couldn't afford that right now, even if I might win in the end. I did what the vet had asked me to do, called back, and gave the information. And when I said the name, he sighed as if he had heard that 100 times. This food does not cover a dog's nutritional needs, he explained. It contains hardly any protein. Protein that is in it comes entirely from plant-based ingredients. In plain English, matches. My girlfriend had tried to feed our dog with vegan dog food. I confronted her the moment she came home from work. I expected her to be shocked and apologize for making a mistake, but instead of remorse, she was completely righteous. It was honestly baffling. She said basically, "It is monstrous to force an animal to eat other animals." Yes, you read that right. MASH. She found it cruel to give a dog, which needs animal protein to survive, food containing meat or animal fat, and even more. She told me she had tried insanely hard to get Jazz used to liking this food, and I had sabotaged all her efforts. The bad guy and not her, who had almost killed our dog with this damn vegan dog food. Apparently, I do what she wants, or I move out. And here's the point. When we got Jazz, all the paperwork was issued in my name. In all official documents, I was listed as Jazz's owner, not my ex. I had a plan. Even before the sun went down, a few days later I moved out, back to my parents with Jazz in tow. At first, my mother was a bit skeptical about having such a big dog in her nice, neat little house. She got used to the idea. As soon as I told her the whole story of how my ex almost killed Jazz because some stupid Ide was more important to her than actually caring for an animal. Matches just seems incredibly ironic to me that the very people who claim to love animals more than anything else are often the same ones who have no problem inflicting unimaginable suffering on these creatures, precisely on those they supposedly love so much.